It's fall and most of the summer crops are gone, but we do have a lot of things that come off in the fall garden, and cabbage is one of them. And so today we're going to do something with cabbage that's traditional from Nebraska via Russia and Germany. This is called a runza. And if you've ever been in Nebraska, they're very popular there. They have runza huts as often as we have hamburger stands on corners. So this is something that fits the fall because of the cabbage, and it's also traditional with some other cultures. I've browned about a pound of very lean ground beef, and I've drained that off. And then to that, I'm going to add the cabbage. Now, cabbage is a high sulfur vegetable. This is shredded as small as I can get it. I've also got about a half of a medium onion, so a small head of cabbage or half of a larger one. Shredded as small as you can get it. The reason for doing that is that cabbage is high in sulfur, and even a few minutes, even as much as 2 minutes difference in cooking time can make a big difference on whether your house smells. Get that cabbage smell that people know you've cooked it for 3 days. Often people who are older tend to prefer it cooked that way, partly because it's a little bit softer, but also because it's cooked the way that they grew up eating it. But most younger people, particularly kids, find that strong sulfur taste to be objectionable. And since this is kind of a fun thing to do, we want kids to be enjoying it also. So you cut it as small as you can, mix it together with the ground beef and the onion that you've also chopped up. And this requires very few ingredients at this point. And simply stir that together. Now you don't want to cook it probably somewhere between 5 to 7 minutes. Any longer than that, more of the sulfur will be released and more of that distasteful smell will come out. So 5 to 7 minutes is all it should take. You'll find some recipes for this kind of thing that extend it much beyond that, but it's not a good thing to do. Now, one of the advantages with cabbage is that it does contain some phytonutrients or phytochemicals, and these are often in the news these days as things that will help reduce your risk of cancer or heart disease. What we find with this one is that research has shown that those people who eat a lot of cabbage, it reacts or combines with or neutralizes some of the estrogen in the body. Now, estrogen is a good thing, but if you have too much of it, it can increase your risk of cancer. And what we find is that this neutralizes or changes the estrogen into a different form that is less apt to promote cancer cell production. So those people who eat lots of it tend to have reduced risks of breast cancer and colon cancer. It's also high in vitamin C, which may also be one of the reasons that it helps reduce risk of cancer. And it's high in fiber, which is another reason we may see some of the impact on colon cancer. Again, this cooks just for about 5 minutes, and you'll need to stir it most of the time, otherwise it's going to stick on the bottom and some of it's going to overcook. You'll also notice that I've combined a little bit of red cabbage and a little bit of carrot in here, primarily to add color. All right, you get a feel for what it looks like after it's cooked for about 5 minutes, and if you like it a little bit softer, you can cook it down a little bit more, but remember, you're going to get a lot more of that sulfur flavor. To this, I'm going to add about half a teaspoon of salt, and that would be optional. Now, you can also be creative with this and season it with a lot of different things. I'm also going to add a teaspoon or so of pepper, and this is freshly ground pepper, but you could use that out of a container as well. Stir that in just a little bit, and then you really need to let this cool down because we're going to put it inside some bread dough, and if it's too hot, it's going to start the bread dough cooking before you actually get it in the oven. So I've got a little bit cooked ahead that we're going to use for the next stage, and what we're going to do here is you can use about 2 pounds of your favorite dough for this particular amount. If you wanted to use a smaller amount and just make 1 loaf of bread, then you can cut the ingredients in half for the rest of it. Let the bread rise. You can use frozen dough and let it thaw, or you can get your favorite bread dough, whichever type you like to make. You can use your bread maker to speed things up, but you let it go through its first rising period. And then you're going to want to cut this into about 8 pieces. And so I'm just going to cut it in half first of all, but cut each piece into about 8 chunks. And you can either do it with a knife or you can just break it into pieces with your hands. And then you simply work it just a little bit as if you were going to make cinnamon rolls. I'm going to use a little flour on my counter and a little bit on the rolling pin so it doesn't stick so much. And try to roll it out pretty much as thin as you can get it. I think the recipe indicates 1/4 of an inch of thickness, but you want it to stretch out so that you get it to be about a 4 by 8 or somewhere in there. It does not need to be in a perfect circle or a perfect rectangle. Just try to get it as thin as you can, particularly on the edges, because you're going to fold them over each other, and it's going to be a lot of bread in one place if you don't. All right, now you take about 1/2 a cup of the mixture that you've made and just plunk it right there in the middle, and then start folding the bread dough up around it, pinching it together so that it won't come out later. I could have rolled this one a little bit bigger to hold this amount of dough, but since the dough is stretchy, you should be able to work it around so that you can get it pinched down and get the filling on the inside fairly well. When you get it so that it's pretty well closed, this one's tearing on me. Of course, it would tear me. I did a bunch of them this morning and they all worked fine, so trust me. Turn it over, put it on a greased baking sheet, either a cookie sheet. You can put it in a cake pan as well, a 9 by 13. The whole recipe, if you do it with all of the bread, it should make about 16, since you're going to cut each of the loaves into 8 pieces. These are then going to go in the oven at 375 degrees for about 20 minutes after they've had a chance to rise for about 20 minutes, because we've only had one rising of the dough. So let it rise about 20 minutes, then put it in the oven at 375 another 20 minutes, and you end up with something that looks like this. And this is what a traditional runza looks like, although they may have different shapes. Some are going to be oblong, depending on how you've shaped the dough in the first place as you're preparing the runza. And then inside of each one, you can also make these up ahead of time so that while it's fairly labor intensive, you can do it on a weekend. And inside, you find all that cabbage and ground beef. You can also freeze them and put them in the freezer so that it makes a lot, but you're making a lot for several days. It's something a little bit different with the fall. Many of us have had Bierocks before, and I hope you'll give it a try. These are called runzas. Be creative with the spices and then create your own name to go with them. For Oklahoma Gardening, this is Barbara Brown.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.